In the years leading up to what would become known domestically as the Great Patriotic War, Stalin and his inner circle anticipated a clash between their communist state and the resurgent Germany. They seemed to believe that when they were going to go to war with the Germans, they were the ones who would be going on the offensive. They would be the ones who would fight this war on their own terms. But when an opportunity arose to attack the Germans while they were distracted with conquering other parts of Europe, the Soviets didn't take it. In fact, it would be the Nazis who attacked first, with the commencement of Operation Barbarossa. So with that being said, if they expected a war, why didn't the Soviets attack Germany first? Well, if I'm going to be honest, the answer is a little bit anticlimactic. They simply weren't ready to fight any kind of war, let alone an offensive one. Let me elaborate. Stalin used secret police and mock trials to eliminate scores of his perceived enemies between 1936 and 1938. Not only did these purges help to foster a mood of fear and paranoia, but they also eliminated large numbers of the Red Army's more skilled commanders, generals and officers. Even people with great experience, such as Mikhail Tukhachevsky, for example. Such a large loss of experience and leadership had a disastrous effect on the Red Army's morale and readiness for war, which was best demonstrated by their initial failures in the Winter War, where they took huge and often unnecessary losses to finish troops. Something else to note is that while the Red Army was huge, it was also spread out, with such a large land area to defend. There was a greater concentration of troops near Japanese-controlled Manchuria due to Stalin's concern of a war with Japan. There had already been several border skirmishes with Japanese forces in the area, giving cause for these concerns. The Soviets had massively built up their troop strength, but the majority of soldiers and officers were inexperienced and not ready for combat, and a lot of the ones that were had most likely been purged at this point. Stalin seemed to know full well that the Red Army was not ready to fight the Wehrmacht, which might partially explain why he was so eager not to provoke Hitler and the Germans into a war. The major focus of the 5-year plans that his regime initiated was to rearm and remilitarize the nation to be ready for such a war. It was stated that quotas were to be met for arms production. However, the major flaw with enforcing strict quotas for production was that it often resulted in the creation of equipment that was of a poorer quality than what it could have been, and what they were producing was often outdated and obsolete in comparison to other nations. Take their tanks for example. In the early years of the war, they could hypothetically field 24,000 of them. Impressive, right? However, just over half of these tanks were combat ready, and there was a severe lack of replacement parts in case they broke down. Also, the Red Army only had 2 tank models that posed a serious threat to their German counterparts by 1941, the KV-1 and the T-3476, with the rest being outclassed by the Germans. Another thing to note is that while the threat of war was impending, Stalin was in denial about the threat that Germany posed. He had received multiple warnings about a planned German invasion in the spring of 1941 from both his spies and other Allied sources, but he chose to ignore them. He wanted to delay the inevitability of a war between themselves and the Germans for long enough to allow the Red Army to both recover from the aftermath of his purges and to remilitarize to a better standard than they were currently at. But he appeared to underestimate German intentions, leaving the Red Army completely unprepared for what was to come.